You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Today on the Useless Information Retrocast, you'll hear stories about why the term ETAOIN SHRDLU appearing in print, it represented a major advance in the sharing of information. And then you'll learn about a boy who was sent home from school not because he had done something wrong, but in this case because he had done something right. Plus, you'll hear about the time the late great Nat King Cole was attacked on stage because of the color of his skin. Well, all those stories, today's retro sponsor, the question of the day, and so much more, they're all coming up next on today's Retrocast. I am Steve Silverman, and this is the Useless Information Podcast.
Useless information.
Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. I hope you had a nice Passover, Easter, or whatever you celebrate. As for me, I took a bit of time away from the podcast. My wife and I took a vacation to the Finger Lakes. That was great. But now she's back at work and I'm back to the podcast. Anyway, I've selected what I believe are some really great stories for you, so let's dive right in. As you know, every once in a while a new technology comes along and it disrupts all that came before it. Right now, of course, AI is the focus, but in the late 19th century, it was another technology that was a disruptor. So here's the story that I wrote regarding that. Here we go. On January 16th of 1886, stockholders of the National Typographic Company gathered in Washington, D.C. to review their $200,000 investment. That's more than $7 million today. Their investment was in a new typesetting device known as the Washington machine. At the meeting, they learned that the patents for their new technology had already been secured in 8 foreign countries, and that the first units were already being manufactured by the Mergenthaler Printing Company. An article in the October 9, 1887 edition of the Kansas City Journal attempted to explain to its readers how the machine, which was now renamed the Linotype machine, how the machine worked. Quote, "It looks as much like an old-fashioned square cooking stove with an upright piano attachment in front and a force pump at the left-hand corner, with an elevated railway across the top and a locomotive arrangement at the bottom, unlike any machine I ever saw. One would think at first glance that it was made to run upon a railway track. A closer inspection would convince one that somewhere or other there must be an oven for baking the ideas of writers into solid type. There is a bank of keys like the typewriter, and so far as the typesetting is concerned, the machine is operated in a similar manner. It is unfortunate that the letters upon the keys are not arranged in the same relative position which they occupy in the printer's case." Unquote. Now, the keyboard layout, it was indeed unusual because not only did it differ from the traditional printer's case, but it also bore no resemblance to the QWERTY arrangement that we use today. And at first glance, it may have appeared random, but in fact the letters were organized by the frequency of their use in the English language. Of course, there's a very good chance you've never seen a Linotype machine operate, but if you're curious, there are videos on YouTube where people do fire these things up and show you how they worked. But what I'm going to do now is attempt to give you a brief overview. Basically, an operator would sit at a keyboard and press a key, and what that did is it released a small metal mold, not the letter itself, but a mold of the letter, which was called a matrix, and that would slide down a chute. And of course, the operator would repeat this letter by letter until an entire line was assembled. That completed linotype was then transferred to a casting chamber where molten metal, which was typically lead, would be poured in to create a solid line of type, hence the name linotype. But once that line was cast, the individual matrices of the molds, they were no longer needed, and they'd be sent back to their storage channels for reuse. And this is where the machine's true brilliance lay. You see, before its invention, printers had to manually sort each letter back to its proper place. The E would go in that spot, the A would go there, the B there, and just keep doing this over and over and over again, which of course is a tedious and time-consuming task. But the Linotype, it automated this step. And that's because every matrix is uniquely keyed. Every letter was a little bit different. Think about the key to your door. It's different from your neighbor's key. Each one is notched differently. Well, the matrices, they were the same way. And what that meant is the machine could return them to the correct slots without any human intervention. And of course, that saves an enormous amount of labor. Clearly, those early investors had chosen wisely. The linotype machine, it revolutionized printing. It made it faster, more efficient, and far more affordable. And yes, there were early predictions that it would put tons of men out of work, but in the end, that didn't really happen. It's just that the nature of their work changed. And the reason for that is quite simple. There was a sudden explosion in print media. There were more newspapers, more magazines, and more books than ever before. Not only that, but the books could be lengthier, the newspapers could be thicker. That meant more people were needed to work these linotype machines. One of the things that the linotype machine did was give rise to a very curious phrase, ETAOIN SHRDLU. I'll spell that for you. ETAOIN SHRDLU. The reason that phrase came about was that when an operator made a mistake, he, and it was almost always a man at this time, he would run his fingers down the keyboard to fill out the rest of the line with characters. Then he'd release that line of type and retype it correctly. Of course, that incorrect line was supposed to be discarded, but some did slip through, so ETAOIN SHRDLU, or some variation of it, would appear in print from time to time. Like all technologies, the linotype eventually became obsolete. After World War II, it was gradually replaced by phototypesetting, and by the mid-1980s, desktop publishing brought the entire process onto our computer screens. Now, on a personal note, some of my favorite classes in high school were printing. I spent 2.5 years learning how to set type by hand, producing things like business cards and stationery. And yes, that did include memorizing the location of every single letter in that printer's case. I remember taking many quizzes on where those letters went, but it was a skill that I never really had a chance to use. Just 6 years later, after graduating from college and securing my first real job, I was designing brochures on a computer using Ventura Publisher, proving once again that my learned skills of the past, they had become obsolete and replaced by a new technology. On Monday, March 22nd of 1909, 13-year-old Mylon Henry Roach Jr. was the luckiest boy in his 5th grade class at the Hubbard School on Kenyon Street in Washington, D.C. That's because his presence in class proved to be too much of a distraction, so he was sent home after being there just 1 hour. It's not that Mylon had done anything wrong. In fact, it was a complete opposite situation. Mylon had done everything right when he saved the life of 6-year-old Clara Marjorie Busher the day before. Here's how it unfolded. Marjorie and several of her girlfriends decided to go to the lower lake at the soldiers' home in Washington, D.C., which was about 2 blocks from her home. Upon their arrival, they took great pleasure in feeding breadcrumbs to the swans that were swimming on the lake. But at one point, Marjorie spotted a swan gracefully swimming near the shoreline, so she bent over to pet it. Then, suddenly, she lost her footing on the wet soil, and down she went into the lake. Struggling to stay afloat, her friends began screaming, and that caught the attention of Mylon Roach. Without hesitation, he just jumped into the water to save her. Here's what he told the Washington Times.
Well, I'll tell you how it happened, although it was nothing more than any boy ought to have done when a little girl might have drowned. I was sailing my boat over on the other side of the lake and needed a piece of string to fix it, so I went to the boathouse to get the string. When I got near the house, I saw some little girls crying and running away from the lake. I asked one of them what was the matter, and she said Marjorie has fallen into the water. So I went over and got her out.
The reporter then asked,
"Didn't you think you ought to have run for somebody to help you?"
No, why? She had gone into the water twice just as I got there, and I was afraid she might drown, so I jumped in and pulled her onto the land. That's all.
Once safely ashore, Mylon took Marjorie to her home at 630 Park Road and told her mom exactly what had happened. He then returned to his home, which was just a block away on the same exact street, and he dried off, changed his clothes, and he spent the remainder of his Sunday at the movies. What he wasn't prepared for was the commotion that took place when he arrived at school the next day. Not only was he declared a hero, but the press showed up to interview him, so his teacher rewarded Mylon by giving him the rest of the day off. Marjorie's dad, that's Fire Captain Andrew Busher, he declared that he would take steps to bring Mylan's act of bravery to the attention of the Carnegie Hero Fund Commission. Now, whether he followed through that submission is unknown, but I did do a search of their database, and unfortunately I have to report that Mylan was never a recipient of the Carnegie Medal. Speaking of the Carnegie Medal, it is still awarded to this day, and roughly 10% of those who are nominated do receive the award. Now, the vast majority of us will never do anything that will make us eligible for the award, so as you can probably imagine, it's incredibly rare that someone would get the Carnegie Medal twice. In other words, they were heroes on two separate occasions. So here's my question for you. How many people have received the Carnegie Medal for heroism twice? Well, I'll leave you in suspense for a bit, and I'll let you know the answer at the end of this podcast. One of the most popular entertainers of the 1950s was the late, great Nat King Cole, and I have to say he's also one of my all-time favorites. I like to joke that he could sing the phone book and it would still sound great. Now, he died back in 1965, so there's probably a lot of people who don't know who he is, but I would bet that every Christmas you hear him singing. That's because he's the one who sings the Christmas song, which is better known as Chestnuts Roasting on an Open Fire. He was also the first African American to host a network television show, appropriately titled The Nat King Cole Show, and it ran on NBC from November 5th of 1956 through December 17th of 1957. The show, it proved immensely popular, but in the days when a single corporation sponsored the entire show, NBC couldn't secure a national sponsor and the show was canceled. And I should mention it was actually Cole's decision to finally pull the plug on the project, but it's generally thought that the advertisers were worried about associating their products with a black artist, and that's for fear of their products being boycotted in the segregated American South. So I thought I'd share with you a lesser-known Nat King Cole story, one that you probably haven't heard, but it clearly shows how dangerous it was to be an African American in the South in the 1950s, and that includes a person as famous as Nat King Cole. Let's begin with an advertisement that appeared in the April 10th, 1956 edition of the Birmingham News, and that ad included a large photo of Nat King Cole and the following text. 2 big shows tonight, for white 7 p.m., for colored 9:30 p.m. In person, Nat King Cole, and I'm going to skip the smaller acts that were listed below that. White tickets now on sale at E.E. Forbes Company, 403 North 20th Street. Prices $2, $2.25, $2.50, tax included. Colored tickets on sale now, Temple Pharmacy. And I should point out that in 1956, Birmingham segregation laws, it prohibited the mixing of races at public gatherings, and that's why there were 2 separate shows. But it was that first all-white show with 3,500 people in attendance that would make front-page news the following day. While Cole was singing his second number, Little Girl, which he had first recorded with his King Cole Trio in 1947, there was a bit of commotion at the main doors of the Memorial Auditorium. An usher overheard a man say, "Let's go get that coon." Suddenly, a small group of men raced down the main aisle, hurdled some of the footlights that lined the front of the stage, and then jumped up on it. Then one of the men tackled Cole, who fell backward from his piano bench, and then his microphone fell and hit him in the face. Both uniformed and plainclothes policemen, who had been stationed throughout the auditorium after receiving a number of threatening phone calls in the days leading up to the performance, they surrounded the men and quickly got the situation under control. That's when one of the assailants yelled out to the audience, "White trash." As Cole lay on the stage, the house lights were turned on and the curtain was dropped. But as the suspects were being escorted off the stage, members of the audience mistook the plainclothes officers for the attackers, and further confrontations took place. Once the audience learned that Cole was okay, one man in the audience repeatedly yelled, quote, "Tell him to come back out so we can apologize for what happened," unquote. Eventually, Cole did return to the stage and was greeted with nearly 10 minutes of applause. He told the audience, quote, "I just came here to entertain you. That's what I thought you wanted. I was born in Alabama," unquote. While there were repeated pleas for him to continue with his performance, he said he was unable to do so because he had back pain from the assault. He then exited the stage amid additional applause, where a doctor examined him and determined that Cole wasn't seriously injured. The all-white audience was then cleared from the building, but Cole did later return for his scheduled 9:30 show before an all-black audience, and that one went off without a hitch. Police arrested 6 men in the attack, 5 of whom had driven more than 60 miles or close to 100 kilometers from Anniston, Alabama, with the intent of stopping Cole's performance. Those Anniston men were identified as 23-year-old Willis Vinson, his brother 25-year-old Edgar Vinson, 35-year-old Kenneth Adams, 18-year-old Orlis Clevenger, and finally 36-year-old Mike Fox. A search of their car uncovered brass knuckles, a homemade blackjack, and 2 .22 caliber rifles loaded with hollowed-out shells. But the men denied they planned to use these weapons in the attack and insisted that they used the guns for hunting. Those 5, plus a 43-year-old Birmingham man named Jesse W. Mabry, they were charged with intent to murder and sent to the county jail. Anyway, after his Birmingham performance, Cole canceled appearances in 3 other southern cities. Those were Greenville, South Carolina, Charlotte, North Carolina, and Raleigh, also in North Carolina. But he did announce that he planned to resume his tour that Saturday in Norfolk, Virginia. Cole made it clear that he was, quote, not mad with anyone in the South, unquote, and pointed out that he had appeared there, quote, at least a half dozen times before, unquote. He added, the people of Birmingham were just great. I just hope I can get back to Alabama again soon to sing. I know I have many friends in the state, and I believe in them. As for the men who were arrested, 4 of them were found guilty of lesser charges than fined and sentenced to 180 days in jail. But upon appeal, that was changed to a 180-day suspended sentence. Now, the other 2 men faced more serious charges. They were charged with assault, and they both pleaded guilty to the charges. Kenneth Adams, he was fined $100, or around $1,200 today, for attacking an officer, while Willie Vinson was fined $50, or around $600 today, for attacking Cole. Neither one had to serve any time.
Have you ever considered how much of your enjoyment of life is based on the rest you get? The good natural sleep that restores your pep and energy? It isn't possible to face the day with enthusiasm after a restless, sleepless night. Now, if you have trouble getting to sleep nights, try drinking hot cocoa malt each night before retiring. This delicious food tonic is helping thousands of men and women to get hours of sound, drugless sleep. Before you resort to pacing the floor, try cocoa malt.
That commercial for Cocoa Malt is from the December 13th, 1936 broadcast of the situation comedy Park Avenue Penners. The show ran on the CBS network from October 4th of 1936 through June 26th of 1938. It starred comedian Joe Penner, who's mostly forgotten today, but at the time he's one of the most popular entertainers in the United States. Between the years of 1933 and 1934, the country had what was known as Penner fever. He just seemed to be everywhere, on the radio and the movies and advertisements and so on. One could even purchase a Joe Penner toy. Unfortunately, Joe Penner died from a heart attack in his sleep on June 10th of 1941. He was only 36 years old. That's incredibly young. As for cocoa malt, it was a chocolate-flavored powder that one added to milk, and it could be consumed either hot or cold. Although the commercial you just heard was aimed at adults, it was mostly marketed to children, and that's because it was supposedly packed with the vitamins and minerals that were needed for proper growth. And part of their appeal to children was that prior to this show, the R.B. Davis Company of Hoboken, New Jersey, the makers of cocoa malt, they sponsored Buck Rogers in the 25th century. Clearly the product's no longer available, so I tried to determine when it was discontinued, so I did a search through the newspaper archives. The earliest ad for cocoa malt I could find was December 9th of 1923, and the last was printed on July 18th of 1971. And now we're up to the portion of the podcast where I share 5 footnotes to history, and today I've selected stories across 5 consecutive decades, one story each from the 1920s through the 1960s. And since these require no further research on my part, I'm just going to read them word for word as they originally published years ago. Our first story was printed on the front page of the Houston Post on May 2nd of 1923. The headline reads, Melody Champion collapses after playing 66 hours. T.J. Kennedy holds world record. Endurance contest ends. The toneless drumming of a piano, almost inaudible for hours, came to a sudden stop. A weary man slumped in his chair, his pain-racked fingers slipping from the keyboard. It happened at 3:27 a.m. Tuesday. T.J. Kennedy Jr., champion of the world at endurance piano playing, dropped after 66 hours and 23 minutes into a deep sleep. Mrs. G. Suber, 5102 Sherman Street, who played from memory from the beginning of the contest, won second honors. She was forced to leave the race at 2:29 a.m. 6 entered. S.W. Wilkes Lindale Place won third place. He quit at 10:10 p.m. Monday. The contest, conducted under the auspices of Sam Houston Post of the American Legion, opened at 2 p.m. Friday with 6 contestants, 3 men and 3 women. 2 of the women, Ms. Inez McLean and Miss Margaret Reichert, were the first to surrender. Mrs. Suber, however, played on and on, showing few signs of strain. She was the favorite until early Tuesday morning. Kennedy, a salesman, entered the marathon as the masked marvel, wearing the colors of the Legion Post. He played with a black mask covering his face until a former world's record, 29 hours, had been broken. Early Tuesday morning, Kennedy was taken from the city auditorium to the Legion Post headquarters, where he continued his attempt to hang up a record good enough to stand longer than most endurance dancing records have endured. After his collapse, he was taken to his home and examined by a physician. Henry A. King, 1705 Hempel Street, left the contest at 5:42 p.m. Monday. Now, if you're curious as to whether or not Kennedy still holds that record, he does not. The record is now held by a guy named Thurzo Zoltan of Romania, who played for 130 hours from September 19th through September 25th of 2022. Wow. Our next story was published on October 23rd of 1930 on page 5 of the San Francisco Examiner. The headline reads, Schenectady cat meows hello to Sydney by radio. Schenectady, New York, October 22nd, Independent News Service. A large grey cat here today holds the honors of being the first of her kind to speak to Australia via radio. While engineers of the General Electric Company shortwave station were talking to others in Sydney, the cat appeared. Jumping quietly on the table, she yawned and then gave a melancholy meow. Far on the other side of the world at the beginning of spring, one of the officials heard it. He paused uncertainly and then, apparently not to be outdone, very politely replied, meow. Our next story was published on April 20th of 1944 on page 17 of the New York Daily News. The banner at the top of this article is Guest Out at Plate. For 90 minutes last night, Venezuelan Consul General Eleazar Morrison was a guest at what he fondly believed was a dinner in his honor given by the Commerce and Industry Association in the University Club. He was mildly surprised when he was not called on to speak. Finally, as the diners got up to leave, he asked a table companion if he was really at the association's dinner. Why, no, replied the companion. This is the National Industrial Information Committee's dinner. Red-faced, the diplomat hurried out and he found the association dinner in another room. Next, we have a story that appeared on the front page of the Des Moines Register on July 18th of 1953. The headline on this one, sees police car coming, so he paints house. Police investigating a prowler call in East Des Moines Friday night came upon a strange sight. A 58-year-old man painting a house by the light of the moon and without any paint. The man arrested for intoxication was visiting a daughter-in-law, police said. He told them that when he saw the police car approach, he thought he'd have, quote, a little fun, unquote. So he grabbed the paintbrush and bucket containing no paint and started swabbing the side of the house. And the last tidbit for today appeared on page 8 of the Evening World Herald in Omaha, Nebraska on May 3rd of 1962. Printed in bold letters at the top of the article, "Woman locates singer in house." Mrs. Zelma R. Brewer, 1828 Florence Boulevard, told police she was awakened by a man singing at 1:45 a.m. Thursday. She followed the sound to her kitchen where she found a young man changing her 1-year-old daughter's diaper. She said she asked the man what he was doing in the house, and he said he heard the baby crying as he was passing by and knocked on the door. When no one answered, he said he crawled through a window, picked up the baby, and started singing to her. He handed the child to Mrs. Brewer and left. So earlier in the podcast, I'd asked you how many people have won the Carnegie Medal twice. But before I reveal the answer, let me give you a bit of background on the medal itself. Andrew Carnegie established the award in 1904 with a $5 million endowment. That's around $18.2 million today. And anyone living in the United States or Canada who risked their lives to save others, whether either one survived or not, they were eligible to receive the award. Now, recipients would receive a small monetary amount plus a 3-inch or 7.6 centimeter medal. But if the committee determined that further financial assistance was needed, the recipient or their survivors could receive that. And the award continues to this day with more than 10,000 people having received it. Last year, in 2025, they honored 69 individuals, 15 of whom were awarded posthumously. In total last year, the fund distributed $1,067,540 in monetary grants. Their 2024 tax filing, that's the most recent one available on their website, it shows that Carnegie's initial $5 million investment has been managed well. Even after all of its expenditures over the 120 plus years of its existence, it has grown to nearly $66 million. As for how many have received the medal twice, the answer is 6, all of whom were men. Sadly, 2 of them died while attempting to save the life of someone that second time. Of course, describing what each of these men did would require quite a bit of time, so what I'll do instead is place a link in the show notes and also on my website, uselessinformation.org, and if you follow that link, you'll be able to read about their acts of heroism. And I have to say, all of them are quite fascinating, so I do encourage you to take a look at them. I hope you enjoyed the stories that I selected today. Just a brief reminder that I'll be presenting some of my favorite stories from this podcast on Wednesday, April 29th on the Malta campus at Hudson Valley Community College. That's scheduled for 1 p.m. I believe the fee for that one is $15 per person, and you can sign up on the Hudson Valley Community College website. Now, if you can't attend that one, I'll be giving a shorter talk with a different selection of stories at the Clifton Park Half Moon Library on Monday, June 1st at 6 p.m. That one's open to the public, and it is totally free, and there's no registration required. You simply show up and head upstairs to the event space. The Useless Information Podcast is proud to be part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network, so visit airwavemedia.com to explore their ever-growing collection of some of the very best podcasts out there. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I hope you'll tune in the next time. Take care, everyone. Bye.